The top business stories live from the Sky News City studio. The government is to confirm plans to impose targets for electric heat pump sales on gas boiler manufacturers. The price of gold hits a record high on growing hopes of imminent US interest rate cuts. Ministers call for businesses to improve menopause support in the workplace or risk losing talented staff. Plus, cinema advertisers prepare for the biggest movie night of the year, the Oscars. Good afternoon, this is Business Live with me, Ian King. The government will confirm plans next week to impose targets for electric heat pump sales on gas boiler manufacturers. The policy has seen furious debate among ministers amid intense lobbying from the industry to abandon it. Sky News understands the Energy Secretary Claire Coutinho had been planning to ditch the plans but has changed her mind. Well, with me for more on this now is our business correspondent, Paul Kelso. Paul, what are the details?
This is a part of the government's plan to decarbonise home heating and get more air source heat pumps, electric heat pumps to replace gas boilers. There's a carrot for consumers, a £7,500 grant. The stick was for the industry to introduce a proportion of sales every year of boilers that had to be electric heat pumps. The industry hated it. They pushed back and said, this is going to, the market's not big enough. In response, they ended up putting more than £100, the big boiler manufacturer, on the cost of gas boilers. The Energy Secretary, Claire Coutinho, took heed of this, and I understand she was minded to bin this policy. It was going to be ditched. It caused consternation in the renewables industry. Well, there's been real pushback from a couple of her ministers, Lord Callanan and Graham Stewart. There's been a very healthy debate inside the department. And not only do I understand that the policy next week will go ahead, albeit with a concession to the industry, the fines won't start being levied until 2025. So a bit of give there. But it does appear that putting money onto gas boilers, the boiler tax as they dubbed it, may come back to bite them. I understand the Energy Secretary is going to refer the gas boiler industry to the Competition and Markets Authority, ask them to have a look as to whether there was collusion in a decision that was made by all the big boiler manufacturers to add about the same amount of money, about £100 to gas boilers at around the same time at the start of this year. There'll be relief in the renewables industry and in the green sector that the government is pushing ahead with one of those climate policies, but probably consternation in the gas industry as their lobbying may have backfired.
OK, thanks, Paul. Now, on International Women's Day, ministers are calling on businesses to improve menopause support in the workplace or risk losing talented staff. According to the government, women aged over 50 represent the fastest growing segment of the workforce, but 1 in 6 aged between 40 and 60 has considered leaving work because of a lack of support. I've been speaking with Mims Davis, the Minister for Disabled People, Health and Work.
We've been doing work for the last year at DWP, cross-government, cross-sector, cross-businesses, to really get the message out about having a positive conversation with your female employees who may be impacted by the menopause. This is a perfectly normal part of any woman's health journey, but we know that it's been affecting workplaces because in terms of the labour market, we've got over 2 million more women in work since 2010. The fastest growing group in the labour market are women over 50. And sadly, 1 in 6 women are considering leaving the workforce aged between 40 and 60 because of impact of the menopause and not being able to have those positive conversations in work about what's going on. But smaller organisations who've seen the retention issue have managed to tackle this. I was at a roundtable at Gower College where they were able to put in a menopause policy in place, have positive conversations and reduce absence by 70%. So if we want to boost UK PLC, we need to boost these conversations in our businesses.
Why do you think this has been such a little discussed topic among employers until now?
Well, forgive me for the prop, but here is the report shattering the silence. 12 months on from appointing Helen Tomlinson, the DWP cross-government menopause employment champion. And it was a stigma. And it is about shattering that silence. And I pay huge credit to Helen for the work that she's been doing cross sectors to start to have these conversations. I think it's been difficult. Maybe perhaps it's been predominantly male-led businesses, or indeed, it's about health. So how do you get it right? And we have worked with West Ham United, Rolls-Royce, Tesco. We've worked with Holland and Barrett. We've worked with BA and Gatwick to change uniform policies, to have this conversation. And I pay huge tribute to the British Standard Institute, who've done a huge amount of work on this as well. Their guidance is going international so that we can get these conversations right. It's a natural, normal part of a women's health journey, but it may be impacting them at work. And many women won't be impacted. The reality is, if it's affecting your job and what you like to do in life, you need to be having those conversations at work. I met Marcia yesterday in Hackney with the Wellbeing of Women charity and Holland and Barrett. She talked about being a woman working in a school, serving lunches, supporting our children. And it was about workplace adjustments. It was too hot. She had a uniform that was inappropriate and she wasn't supported, and therefore she left the labour market. We're seeing that in all walks of life because we haven't been able to support the right conversations. So that's why today, if businesses can have a look at the Help to Grow portal that we have for government, there's some really good guidance and best practice for large and small businesses. And this matters too in the civil service. Most of my workers and civil servants in DWP, my amazing team, are women, and many of them over 50. So it affects ourselves, and we're marking our own homework on this too, with menopause cafes, menopause awareness, menopause champions, to make sure that we have those good, positive conversations and that we bring men into the conversation too.
What legal rights in the workplace do menopausal women currently have?
So there's equality laws in place for you, but really, Ian, what we're trying to do is get to the point that people don't need to get into this situation, that they can have a positive conversation with their line manager, and that this is about reasonable adjustments and listening to women. In fact, I was in Aberdeen with the oil and gas sector, where we've got, not enough women there. So we need to make sure that everybody is involved, that you see it as part of your usual outreach to employees, that you give good training. And in fact, we've been doing many men-only sessions and many men leadership sessions. There's been some amazing men leaders who've come out and talked about this and their workforce because they've seen it at home equally. So we need to make sure that we're having positive conversations, that the Equality Act is adhered to, but also people need to understand, if you're perhaps from a South Asian background, you can have an earlier menopause. It may not be only women over 50 you need to be talking to, and of course perimenopause. So that's why the British Standard Institute guidance is there. It's, you can find it also, further details on the Help to Grow portal on .gov.uk, to make sure you're having the right conversation so you don't get into this situation. And you can talk about perimenopause too.
Mims Davis speaking to me earlier. Some other business news stories for you now. And in annual profits at the international events, academic publishing and digital services group Informa have more than doubled as the post-lockdown bounce back in demand for exhibitions and conferences continues. Pre-tax profits for 2023 at the world's largest exhibitions company came in at £492.1 million, up from £168.8 million in 2022. Well, earlier I spoke to Informa's chief executive, Lord Carter, and asked whether this level of growth was sustainable.
I don't know if it's sustainable at quite that level, but as well as reporting our results for last year, which, as you say, were strong, I think we went as far as say there were standout results for 2023. We've also given guidance for this year, 2024, and we are seeing real forward growth this year, year on year, which is less to do with bounce back and more to do with the underlying attractiveness of the products and the portfolios and the brands and the markets we operate in.
The FTSE 100 paper and packaging group DS Smith has agreed in principle to a takeover by its larger rival Mondi. The deal values DS Smith, which is Europe's largest cardboard and paper recycler and which employs 30,000 people around the world, at £5.14 billion. It's the latest big tie-up in the global paper and packaging industry and comes just months after a third FTSE player in the field, Smurfit Kappa, agreed to buy the US supplier Westrock for $11 billion. And Frasers, the retail empire controlled by entrepreneur Mike Ashley, said today it's put out the luxury e-commerce business Matches into administration just 2 months after buying it for £52 million. Confirming a story broken last night by Sky City editor Mark Lyman, Frasers said Matches had consistently missed its business plan targets and, notwithstanding support from the group, continued to make material losses. It added, while Matches' management team has tried to find a way to stabilise the business, it has become clear that too much change would be required to restructure it, and the continued funding requirements would be far in excess of amounts that the group now considers to be viable. Now, it's the biggest night of the year for the movie world on Sunday, Oscars night, a big occasion not only for the film producers and the stars, but also the advertising world. Anyone who's been to the cinema over the last 70 years will recognise this. Yes, that's the famous sound of the British cinema advertising company Pearl & Dean. Well, joining me now is Claire Turner, the company's Chief Commercial Officer. Claire, good to see you this afternoon. How important are the Oscars for putting bums on seats?
I think they're incredibly important because they just help raise the profile of cinema in everyone's lives. You know, you turn on the news, you hear about the latest stars, actors, and yeah, I think it's both Oscars and the BAFTAs and the Globes just really help elevate cinema. So yeah, we really love this time of year because there's obviously a really great quality film product out as well. And
do you get an uplift in advertising around Oscars weekend?
I wouldn't necessarily say around Oscars weekend, but certainly around the Oscar films. And there's definitely a boost around revenues when we have these sort of big titles coming out. Usually we know what are being nominated at the end of the year, so we start talking to brands about opportunities around the Oscar titles. So it's it's been a really, really positive start to this year overall for cinema advertising. We've had a brilliant run. We've had one of our most successful quarters so far in a while, even compared to pre-pandemic. So it's been great for revenue and also for admissions. We're seeing more people going to the cinema. Obviously, there was the blow that was the writers and the actors strike at the end of last year, or the second half of last year. But we're now seeing audiences coming back. So we're seeing growth, not quite double-digit growth yet, but we are getting there. So cinema's doing well.
Well, that's encouraging to hear. I mean, you kind of preempted my next question because before the pandemic, cinema advertising was running at record levels. How long did it take to recapture that sort of 2019 level?
Well, there's two sides to this, Ian. There's the admissions and there's people going to the cinema, and then there's the advertising revenue. So you're right, at the end of 2019, we had our best ever year for admissions and for revenue. And if we look at revenue first, we were actually back to, we were even higher than 2019 revenue levels in 2022. So we had double-digit growth on 2019 revenues. Audiences is a slightly different story. So we're still not back to pre-pandemic levels, but we are getting there. And films such as, obviously, both nominated in the Oscars this time, both Barbie and Oppenheimer, the Barbenheimer effect had a huge impact on, I think, just, cinema really getting its swagger back, and just the cultural relevance and the fact that brands are really keen to move closer to cinema. And yeah, we're seeing some great sort of partnerships and activations as a consequence of all the great noise around film.
Exclusive release windows for cinemas fell away. They were shortened post-pandemic. Has that had much of an impact?
Well, they've come back. They were shortened during the pandemic for understandable reasons. You couldn't actually go to the cinema because they were closed. But the release windows are back, not to pre-pandemic levels, but certainly between 30 and 45 days, which is great news. And then you've also got, I guess, allied to that, the fact that the streamers, Apple, Amazon, Netflix are also having theatrical releases, having cinematic releases for their titles. And we've had a record year for the streamers for Oscar nominations this year too. Obviously, we've got Maestro for Netflix, and we've got Killers of the Flower Moon for Apple. So all that billions of pounds of investment that have been made
Claire,
by the streamers is great news for cinema going.
OK, Claire, we have to leave it there, I'm afraid. I hope you enjoy Oscars night. Good to see you this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Still to come here on Business Live, I'll have a look at how the markets have ended up this week. Don't go away.
Women seeing celebrities who they can recognise, they can identify with, talking about something that they are going through and may not have realised. I think it's really helped to bring the conversation to the fore. That said, I know what you're talking about, that there's been this dramatisation and that it's catastrophising, and I feel that there's got to be a balance somewhere. There's a lot of focus on all of the very extreme stuff that happens. And I think we need to be talking about the education, the positive things that women can do themselves before we go to every woman is going to have a terrible menopause. And I don't think that does women any favours, because people start to say, oh, menopausal woman, oh, you know, they're all in a box, they're all going through the same experience. I think there are an awful lot of other papers and a lot of other research that says that the psychological impact of menopause can be greater than women realise. And actually it's often one of the first signs, anxiety and sort of low mood. Is it internal, is it external factors? We're living in a very complicated world. People, of course there are stresses, but there are stresses at 30, there are stresses at 20. Is it a big coincidence that as your hormones are readjusting in your 40s, early 50s, that suddenly these, yes, you're dealing with probably elderly parents, work, but you've got that problem at other times of your life. So I think everything is being minimalised in that report to say it's not your hormones. What we need to be talking about is it can actually be a time to reframe your life and actually if you've been a little bit off track, get back on track, looking after yourself with your diet, your exercise, your movement. There's so much evidence-backed information about women need to be moving more. It's going to help with their physical health, their mental health. So I see it as a gate opening rather than a gate closing. And I think that's the misconception with menopause.
Slide yemiyoruz. Slide better. Fly Emirates. Fly better. Thank you.
Well, the price of gold has hit a new all-time high this afternoon amid rising expectations of US interest rate cuts in the near future. The yellow metal at one point hit $2,185 per troy ounce today, and it has risen 7% during the last 6 sessions. On foreign exchange markets, well, those interest rate expectations, along with downgrades of the number of jobs created in the United States in January and February, have hit the US dollar. The pound is currently at its highest level against the greenback since the 27th of July last year, standing up nearly 1/3 of 1% against the dollar. It's up by nearly 2/5 of 1% against the euro. Single currency very modestly lower against the dollar this afternoon. On the equity markets, this is how European stocks have ended the day. It was looking quite a positive session, but it's all turned around in the last hour or so. One of the big talking points in mainland Europe today is HelloFresh. Shares of the German meal kit maker have fallen by 40% in Frankfurt following a profits warning. Well, here in London, the FTSE 100 is going into the weekend on a downbeat note. It's finished down just over 2/5 of 1%. Some of the big dollar earners, I suspect, weighing on the index this afternoon. The leading blue chip faller today was Entain, the betting and gaming group, off another 4% following Thursday's disappointing results. Rentokil Initial, meanwhile, that's dropped 2.75% after, or 2.5% there, after running into profit taking. It rose by 17% yesterday. To the upside, DS Smith has finished up just over 5% higher after agreeing in principle to a takeover. Meanwhile, outside the FTSE 100, the enhanced annuity provider Just Group, look at that, up nearly 14% after its results today have been well received. Over on Wall Street, well, it's a mixed picture right now. Nasdaq currently off just under 2/3 of 1% right now. Mixed jobs, US jobs report taking a bit of digesting this afternoon. Talking points today on Wall Street include Rivian, the electric vehicle maker, currently ahead 6.75% on strong sales figures. Meanwhile, the oil price is currently on course for its second weekly fall in 3. Barrel of Brent crude will currently set you back $82.28 a barrel. That is off just over 4/5 of 1%. Well, joining me this afternoon is our old friend Bill Dinning, Chief Investment Officer at Waverton Investment Management. Bill, good to see you as ever. What did you make of the US jobs figures? They're a bit of a mixed batch.
I think that's exactly right. And it's interesting that the market started thinking before the open, it was sort of looking quite positive because, as you said earlier, the interest rate backdrop looks as though the market was starting to think that, on balance, the number was a bit weaker. Hourly earnings were lower than it was expected. And if you take into account the revisions to the previous data, actually the jobs market didn't look quite as hot as people worried about, and the unemployment rate went up. Yeah. So there was something for everybody. I think on balance, it's possible that, you know, the big thing for the market is they've convinced themselves since about October the Fed's going to cut rates this year. You know, they started thinking they might do it as early as March. Well, we're in March. Not going to happen now. Will it happen in June or July? And all of these data points, you know, have an influence on that. So that's the big picture story, I think. And we still think they'll probably cut rates later this year, but maybe not as often as the market thinks.
Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, the market until recently was pricing in 5 rate cuts from the Fed this year.
And they still had 4 as of this morning. And that might be a bit punchy. I mean, the US economy has mystified some old-timers like me, its resilience. But it is resilient, and inflation expectations have come back for sure. So the Fed's got some policy room if they need to cut rates. But I'm not sure at the moment you'd be thinking that there was an economy that naturally needed lower policy rates.
No, absolutely. But I mean, Jay Powell, the Fed chair, actually sort of gave those sort of hopes another leg, didn't he, with his statement yesterday? I mean, that's weighing on the dollar a bit.
Yes, and I think on balance, it's still likely that they will cut. And they've also got to balance it with the perception politically. You know, we've got the election. The Federal Reserve doesn't like to be sort of making big moves in interest rates in the 3rd and 4th quarter. So that might encourage them to cut rates in the summer. But yeah, the dollars have been a little bit weaker, and that's helped a few things, I suspect.
Yeah, well, I mentioned the gold price there. I mean, is this just a case of it being bad for the dollar, good for gold, or is there a bit more to it than that, do you think?
That's probably a big part of it. I do think it's interesting that gold's been quite firm. I mean, it hit an all-time high, I think, back in October or something, and it's hit, as you said, it's just been going very great guns in the last few days. Whether there's a bit of hedging going on, I'm not sure. Inflation expectations, by most measures, appear to be very well controlled on both sides of the Atlantic. Yes, the dollar's marginally weaker, but it's pretty marginal. So you wouldn't have thought automatically that that would be, you know, pushing people into gold in a big way. But it's possible that there's a bit of hedging relative to, because one of the risks to the market is that those inflation expectations, which have been very benign, if something happens to boost inflation expectations, that would be bad for lots of things, not least what does the Fed do in that environment.
Yeah, do you still see a lot of interest from clients in gold?
Yeah, we do. We, particularly for our private clients, we think it's worth having some exposure to gold, and we prefer to own the physical metal. There's nothing wrong with gold mining companies potentially, but we prefer to just own the physical. I think it's a useful alternative, and it does have as a sort of store of value. So I think there's still some merit to gold, even though I accept that it's a barbarous relic.
In the words of John Maynard Keynes, of course. But it's interesting. I mean, a lot of people go into Bitcoin these days for similar reasons.
I prefer the longevity of the history of gold as a store of value, I think. And I also think that when you're looking, particularly if you've got a sort of diversified portfolio, having that metal that has shown itself to have some characteristics at a time of inflation of retaining a store of value, I think has got some merit to it. So Bitcoin and all other crypto, they appear to be with us, but I would prefer to see them over a longer cycle.
All right, Bill, got to leave it there. Good to see you as ever. Thanks for joining me. That's it from me for this week. I'm back on Monday at 11:30. Hope to see you then. Stay tuned. Up next, it's Jonathan Samuels with the News Hour. Have a